Do you enjoy the harvest of Missouri through food, fuel, or fiber? Interested in strengthening your community or making a difference in the lives of others? You're in the right place. This is Stand for Ag with Missouri Farmers Care. Join us for thoughtful conversations around the intersections of farmer, rancher, and consumer interests. Grab a seat, press play, and join the conversation.
Welcome back to Stand for Ag. We are thrilled that you're joining us again today and have a great conversation lined up. Today, I'm joined by Bradley Schad. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Missouri Corn Growers Association and Missouri Corn Merchandising Council. Bradley and I have worked in parallel or together as colleagues for many years now. Bradley has been with corn for over 13 years. And has recently just taken his position as CEO, but has a deep and thorough knowledge. He is definitely a subject matter expert in the matter of ethanol, vehicles, usage. And so welcome to the podcast, Bradley.
Glad to be on. Happy to be here and appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Yes. Well, Bradley has done a lot of innovative things to work on ethanol consumption, but as you've done that, Bradley, let's just do, this is part of our series on ethanol, a history of Missouri biofuels, but we haven't really hit on Mythbusters. Since I joined corn in 2003 or 2005, since you've joined corn in 2008, we've both heard a lot of misinformation that's pretty easy to perpetuate in the marketplace. So tell me a few of the things what could you answer in your sleep about ethanol?
Well, there is a lot of myths out there about ethanol. We started out, we did a lot of misinformation campaign on fuel economy. The fuel economy part of it, whenever you go all the way to E85, the thing about it is the vehicle isn't optimized for that fuel. It can allow it to be run on it, but it doesn't optimize for that fuel. The truth of the matter is, whenever you optimize for octane, which ethanol is the best source, cheapest source, and most abundant source of octane out there, you recover a lot of the BTU value that's in there. It makes the engine actually more efficient. However, there's lower BTUs in the fuel, so you don't quite all the way recover, but it actually makes the vehicle more efficient, more clean for the environment as well. Working in small engines, there is just a huge amount of fallacies out there in small engines. I worked on that a lot. I've still got my personal four-wheeler running on E85 just to show that ethanol is not the cause of all the issues with small engines. John Deere came out with a flex fuel E85 John Deere lawnmower a few years ago. They didn't continue with that program. They had it on one of the smaller machines, so it wasn't well accepted, but like I said, I still got that four-wheeler run on E85, and how we got the program started is I came in, I was actually using E85 in college in my non-flex fuel vehicle, blending my own to a 40% level in my vehicle. It was a lot cheaper, it was $1 a gallon cheaper, and I was a poor college student. I couldn't afford the gas at the time, so it made it work. But there were just so many fallacies out there. And so whenever I came on with Missouri Corn, I took a bunch of small engines and ran them on higher blends in testing to show that it's not the ethanol, it's actually the gasoline portion of the fuel that goes bad. Produces gums and varnishes, which can cause plugging of jets and carburetors and fuel lines and systems, and that runs the engine lean, which increases the combustion temperature of the engine that can wear and tear on your engine.
We've all heard, right, that gas goes bad over the winter. Yep. But I think what we've seen, right, correct me if I'm wrong, is that ethanol becomes an easy scapegoat for problems that otherwise could be directly attributed to the gasoline aging and getting old over the winter.
And a good story to go into that, I actually went to the Outdoor Power Equipment Institute's national show and got to speak to one of the stabilizer companies who we won't name, but was talking with them, and I said, you've got to have a chemist on hand to actually produce this stabilizer, right? And he said, yeah. And he said, actually, he's right here. And so their head chemist walked over I said, you as a chemist know that ethanol doesn't go bad. So what are you stabilizing? And they said, well, it's actually the 90% fuel. And he said, you didn't read our label completely because it says cures your ethanol fuel problems. Well, ethanol fuel is 10% ethanol, 90% gasoline. So we're curing that. And I said, but why would you say ethanol whenever it's the gasoline portion that you're actually stabilizing? And he said, well, you got to talk to my marketing guy, which he was still standing there at the time. And he goes, well, we have such a small label that whenever we sell our product inside a store, whether it be O'Reilly's or whatever, if we say cures your gasoline problems, they will buy our competitor's product because it says cures your ethanol fuel problems. And the mechanic told him that it was the ethanol that caused the problem. So it's just a revolving door and a way that consumers are misled. They're not lying to them, but it's misleading of what the actual problem is, just because the oil industry has spent so much money attacking and blaming. Meanwhile, they have changed the formulation of gasoline, used more aromatics, which are more corrosive to more things in small engines than what ethanol is. I mean, ethanol is safe enough to drink in its pure form. Don't recommend that, but it is. So how is it going to deteriorate your fuel components in your engine? So,
yep. It, as Steve Murphy said, they're running a very complex, technologically evolved moonshine distillery. And so those, I've talked a few times on this podcast on those scare techniques. Particularly, we see this in food, right? We see this in animal agriculture. We see this in animal consumption, or organics, none of which we have any problem with. It's the fear-based or misperception-based marketing that is so frustrating to agriculture, in that it's so easy to capitalize on that misinformation or on that potential fear, or scare consumers into spending more on their product that is absolutely frustrating and hard to get around in agriculture, because fear sells, right?
Yeah, absolutely, fear sells. It's one of the many things that does, but it goes far and beyond anything else in the market. Whenever you can get somebody to fear something, they will do crazy things. I mean, you look at the COVID issue, and everybody was afraid we were going to run out of toilet paper, so it just did a mass panic buying and took it out of the stores. So it actually caused the shortage, and so you see that a lot in today's world, and it's unfortunate. We're trying to get the message out there, but whenever you're telling the truth and you're using facts, it just doesn't get passed on as well. It's just like whenever a story is misstated in the public eye, they go and correct it, but they bury it in the bottom back page in the bottom corner of the paper. So
yes, and as you mentioned, and as Steve Murphy and I talked about in the earlier episode, that ethanol is a local farmer-backed homegrown fuel that is working to increase its share of the marketplace, but it's truly a David and Goliath situation.
Absolutely.
And when I would go work for corn growers and advocate for ethanol in the halls of the Capitol, there would be us and an army of corn growers who would take their day off and come into the Capitol in the spring, park the planter, come in. But it would then be 6 high-paid lobbyists that were there every single day, in and out, building relationships with legislators to make sure that oil's profit share and oil's stake in the gas tank was protected. And that's just one small view of the influence of an established market.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we battled many days in the Capitol with the oil industry and continue to do so today. We're trying to push forward with more E15, and the oil industry won a lawsuit. They had better lawyers than we did on stopping E15 year round. However, I think a lot of the retailers are going to go ahead and continue blending E15 that already are. Hopefully we can get either a legislative or regulatory change that will allow retailers, give them certainty that they can continue selling E15 into the future. One of the other
and that court issue, Bradley, was based on clean
it was,
air restrictions, essentially,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Simplify that for us.
In the Clean Air Act of 1992, whenever it was introduced, ethanol was introduced. Whenever you blend ethanol into gasoline, it bumps the vapor pressure 1 psi. And so there is caps for clean air needs. There's caps on the amount of vapor pressure that gasoline can have. Well, that 1 pound bump is actually negated by the way that ethanol actually cleans up the tailpipe emissions. And so it actually negates that and is actually better. So they gave that blending an E10. But the way that it works is after you get to E10, it starts going back down a curve. And E15 is actually lower vapor pressure than E10. And it's also cleaner on the tailpipe emissions. But due to the way the law was written, it capped it at E10. Well, the Trump administration tried to expand that to E15 with the regulatory change, but since it was a statutory requirement, they said the way that he did it was not legal. And so the court agreed with the oil industry, and they have since pulled back that regulation that Trump implemented. So we have to change the label in the summertime months for flex fuel vehicles only, because there is an exception for that.
So really, it's a legacy policy hamstringing cleaner air, cleaner burning fuel, really just due to technology has evolved. We're a long way since that legislation was written in 91, 92. And that's a bureaucratic barrier that needs to go.
Right. In 1991, we never imagined that we would get over 10% of the market. There was, we were using very small plants at the time, and our plants are 10 times the size now of what we were talking about in 1991, 92. So yeah. It has changed. That regulation needs to go.
So our conversation is naturally headed down the path of federal policy. Let's continue walking that path. But I have one more myth buster along those lines for you before we talk about today in federal policy and what is going on in Washington, D.C. and globally that could impact ethanol for better or worse. So subsidies would sum it up, right? So subsidies in the marketplace for ethanol. Where are we today and where have we come from?
The ethanol industry doesn't receive any subsidies whatsoever from the federal government. We have evolved from that. There used to be a 45-cent blender's credit that we continue to get hit over the head on. Even last year, whenever I went to DC, there was a congressman that still believed we got that, which in reality, we never even got that 45 cent because it went to the blender of record, which was typically an oil marketer, a gasoline retail marketer. We have lobbied and received some dollars, both state and federally. We got some of the COVID dollars to actually help with cleaner air by installing higher blends of ethanol in the state. The Missouri Department of Agriculture put a program together which gave retailers the ability to put in higher blends of ethanol and E15 as well. That program is continuing on. This past year in the state legislature, they passed getting $1 million for ethanol blends, as well as $1 million for biodiesel blends to get infrastructure installed to where consumers can benefit and have these blends out there for themselves to use in their vehicles.
And is Missouri Corn Merchandising Council a partner in that program, Bradley?
Yes, we lobbied for that. On the HBIP funds that we had last year, we were a partner. MASBA had a different program that we were a partner in and put some dollars towards as well to get more infrastructure out there as well. So you had, we're seeing Casey's and Signal Food Stores. There's a few others that have been putting in pumps across the state that we're helping fund. So it's a great program. Hopefully we can get more money. I think all that money will be used by the end of the year, and hopefully we can get the legislature to continue that program on.
Yeah. Well, thanks to the legislature for that support, certainly, I'm sure. And that's in addition, Bradley mentioned a couple. We also have a conversation in this series with James Greer from MFA Oil long time stalwart supporters of those farm-based fuels, those same customers that support their company and their business and that farmer-owned model. So MFA has been a partner for a long time.
Absolutely has. James has been a wonderful friend. Getting E85 infrastructure put in. They've started selling E15 as well, which is a big thing for them to move towards. We're seeing more and more of that. It seems the new stores that they either revamp or build, they'll put blending units in there to allow more ethanol to be sold. So MFA Oil has been a partner for many, many years. We've got some EPA DOE dollars years ago that we got 5 different locations across the state putting in blender pumps. So MFA Oil has and Break Time has been an awesome partner.
Good.
Along the way.
So heading down then, where are we today? So there's a lot of conversation going on around clean air, carbon, climate change, and though it seems like outsized fingers want to be pointed at agriculture directly, we have a lot to offer, right? From trees and livestock and crops and cover crops and all of the practices that we implement. We also have a fairly significant portion of our carbon footprint in this country comes from personal transportation vehicles, right?
Absolutely.
So what does ethanol have to offer there? And read the tea leaves for me on where you think the conversations are going.
Absolutely. So we actually introduced what we call the Next Generation Fuels Act into Congress, worked with Sherry Bustos. We have 2 of our members of Congress on board as signers to that as well, Congressman Smith and Congressman Cleaver. We hope to get a few more, if not all of our congressmen on this bill. And what this bill does is, because ethanol is cleaner, as you said, and corn actually sequesters carbon into the ground, you can actually have a huge benefit if you optimize that engine, as we talked about earlier, optimize that engine for octane. But right now, the auto industry actually doesn't have a pathway forward to build that engine because they don't get the credits. Basically, the way the CAFE system is set up is that the only way that you can meet the requirements in the future is if you build electric vehicles. That's unfair to the liquid fuel transportation system for ethanol, because if you use ethanol, you actually can get net zero or below in some different technologies. And so we're looking at ways to even the playing field to where the liquid fuel industry can be used in the future for locations that need it. You know, electric vehicles can be used in some areas, but out in outstate Missouri, it's pretty difficult to find an electric vehicle charging station. And on top of that, whenever you're using that much power, you've got to have the grid, but you also have to have the power source. And right now we've seen brownouts and different things. So what this Next Generation Fuels bill does is gives the auto industry a pathway forward with liquid fuels through the CAFE credit system. If you increase the octane, they can get better fuel economy and better emissions. And actually, Missouri Corn has done a lot of testing. We've got a Ford F-150 that got, all we did was increase the compression from a 10.5 to 1 to 12 to 1 compression ratio down worked with Oak Ridge National Labs in Tennessee to prove that if you use ethanol and octane, you can get better emissions, better fuel economy, better horsepower. So with that being said, the better horsepower, you can actually decrease the engine size, which in turn gives you better fuel economy as well. And we're kind of see that with the turbo boosted engines, but the ethanol is what gives them the benefit because it's cheaper. It gives the consumer a benefit. You know, there's a lot of talk. They said, well, there's premium out there already, so why won't they build it for that? Well, people don't want to pay 60 and 80 cents a gallon more for their fuel. Well, if you use ethanol, you don't have to do that. So what this does is it creates a requirement that the fuel be there, the vehicles be there, and the consumer can buy it. And so it gives, plus giving the autos the credit that it deserves for building these engines that are more fuel efficient.
That certainly makes sense. So as I think through carbon footprints, right? As I think through, as you said, making it more efficient, more um, definitely improving the emissions profile of a tank of gasoline mix. I also just can't help but wonder the carbon footprint of transporting crude around the world, right? Like I've kind of wrapped this whole conversation around, we find that consumers love local foods, right? We don't always find that consumers are willing to spend money to pay for the premium of those local foods, but they love the concept. And don't we all? Don't we all want to support our neighbors, our communities, and see a thriving county, see Missouri agriculture thrive? So this is one easy way to do that, in that this fuel has probably been generated within driving distance. You know, any ethanol that you're seeing has probably been generated within driving distance of where that distribution point is. And that certainly has a carbon footprint benefit over our foreign-based fuels.
Absolutely does. You not only think about that, but you think of the carbon footprint that it takes to run our military as well, because our military is used to protect that oil getting here. And so that's just a whole nother issue that's the reason the RFS was implemented. One of the reasons was domestic security, and you don't have to use that military to protect that oil getting here. Yeah, on the same side, we talk about the local. It seems like whenever you're looking at electric vehicles, there's not very many places in the world that has the lithium and the cobalt that it takes to build these batteries. And so we go from one resource to another that neither one is renewable. You can't use that again. And so you look at the carbon footprint. That's the other unfortunate thing about electric vehicles is they're on such an unfair playing field. They don't have to be put into a chamber where a lot of times certain tires won't meet the vapor emission requirements in the chambers that are required. But an electric vehicle doesn't have to be put into that test chamber where a vehicle running on ethanol or gasoline does. And so that's another unfair practice advantage. There's still emissions to a what they call as a zero emission vehicle, an electric vehicle, because it's not zero emissions. Whenever you factor in the lithium being mined, being transported across the world to the U.S., we can't get that here at home, and so we're going to have to find it somewhere else. And so it's going from one finite resource to another, where ethanol is a renewable resource, and you can continue producing it year in and year out.
I think my takeaway to hear you share those facts is the same as you don't have to eat with a certain label, with a natural label or whatever, to feel like you're doing good. You're
Absolutely.
doing universal good, right? So you don't have to feel, if you care about the environment, emissions, climate change, whatever it may be, those consumers don't have to just seek out that electric vehicle track to feel like they are making an impact for the good in that area which they care so much about. There are other paths, and maybe
Absolutely.
it may take some research and maybe a little harder to justify to friends, but we know from the work that we've done over decades that there are certainly clean burning fuel alternatives that are available here and now, not down the road, but in the legacy fleet that we still have. There are ways to improve our emissions and our carbon footprint ourselves.
Absolutely.
Let's hit on a high note, Bradley. Tell me what is going really well. Corn grind, markets. Let's just go somewhere on a high note.
So we're definitely working on our exports as well. We're seeing more corn grind in China. We've had a lot of exports there. We are excited to see more and more ethanol being consumed in other countries as well, and more countries actually putting in requirements to blend more ethanol. India has a 10% standard. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to be blended into India, but we have opened an office in India with the U.S. Grains Council to work on that, to try and get them to allow U.S. ethanol to be imported. You've got places like Indonesia, Vietnam that are putting in higher and higher standards. Vietnam put a 10% in. I believe Indonesia is at 20 or 25%. And so we continue to find more locations that we can export to. We're building those markets, developing those markets to try and implement more corn grind into those countries, not just in the U.S., but also help their environment. You know, they're conscious with this COP26. There's all kinds of countries that are looking at ways to do that, and even Europe has talked about increasing their what they call bioethanol. They used to import ethanol from the U.S., and we're trying to get that back as well.
So that conversation on adoption of ethanol in developing markets and developing worlds reminded me of one last myth buster: food versus fuel. That those aren't as food secure nations as we are. And so tell me about global corn supply and feedstock supply for ethanol. Is it strong?
It is very strong. We have more corn available now for non-ethanol uses than we ever have. And so we continue to expand those. We're also working in places like Egypt to get more corn grind through animal feed there. Our farmers are doing such a phenomenal job raising corn on less and less acres because of the technology that we work with our partners, Bayer, Pioneer, all those companies. The technology is just better and better every year. Our yield trends continue to go up and meet the standard. I mean, this year was not a great year. You look at how long we were without rain, and yet we're going to probably raise the fourth to sixth largest crop that Missouri ever has. Even into Iowa, it's coming out better than they thought they had. And you've got more and more countries doing the same thing, using that same technology. And so we're going to have the corn available, and it's really just getting it to the consumer that needs it.
Wonderful. Well, I have appreciated this conversation, Bradley. Listeners, I'm sorry to have shown my bias. I really am. I spent over a decade working for the Missouri Corn Growers Association and Missouri Corn Merchandising Council. I've delved deep into this, had a lot of conversation. I do love the ethanol industry, the economic activity that it generates in our state, and just also it ties so well into a Buy American and Support Our American Communities platform that I follow, that I hope that this conversation has been as great for you guys as it has for us. Bradley, thank you for leading corn, Missouri Corn Growers Association, Missouri Corn Merchandising Council, and thanks so much for your time coming to us today from his farm outside of Versailles, Missouri, right?
Absolutely, just outside of Versailles. So I appreciate the opportunity, and anytime I can help to bring information to other people, I'm always willing to do that. So thank you.
We appreciate it. We appreciate the partnership. I would be remiss if I didn't say so. Bradley and the team at Missouri Corn are integral partners in so many things that Missouri Farmers Care is able to do, from our Drive to Feed Kids to our Ag Education on the Move to our Ag-Ready County designation, a Scent Cardinals campaign that reaches consumers, a Leopold Conservation Award program, essentially everything that Missouri Farmers Care is able to do. Missouri Corn has a hand in. So it happens due to Missouri Corn and many partners across agriculture. We work together well, right, Bradley? We have a team mentality, and that's what makes for success.
Absolutely. We are so proud to be a partner of Missouri Farmers Care and fighting the battles, as well as just getting information out there. People don't know if we're not able to get out there, and Missouri Farmers Care does such a phenomenal job of getting out there to consumers, to kids, and happy to be a partner.
Well, thank you. And thanks for tuning in to this episode of Stand for Ag with Missouri Farmers Care.
Thank you for joining the Stand for Ag podcast with Missouri Farmers Care. We're excited to bring you new stories each week. We as agriculturalists have a lot of stories to tell. Stories of resilience, grit, and stories of families that are united by their passion for agriculture. Each week, tune in for a new episode and join the conversation.